The smell of roasted turkey and spiced cranberry sauce usually brings comfort, but at Victor Sterling's penthouse in New York City, Thanksgiving dinner was always a different kind of experience. It was less about gratitude and more about subtle declarations of status, especially where I was concerned. My father-in-law, Victor, was a man who measured success in square footage of retail space and the depth of his stock portfolio. My world, the world of tech startups, was, in his eyes, flimsy. I sat at the long, polished table, Serafina's hand a comforting weight on my knee under the tablecloth. She was my wife, and she understood the silent battles I fought every time we gathered here. Victor, at the head of the table, was in his element, holding court. His voice, a booming baritone, carried over the polite chatter.
"Still playing with apps, Reese?"
He boomed, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes plastered on his face. It was his usual opening. He'd always make it sound like I was building sandcastles, not a business. My stores, Sterling Home and Lifestyle, have real assets, real profits, not some digital fantasy. He would emphasize real with a flourish, as if to underscore my supposed lack of it. The conversation, as always, steered back to his retail empire. He'd list off locations, boast about sales figures, and subtly contrast it with my work. He never missed a chance. "You know, Reese, it's about building something tangible, something that stands the test of time, not some fleeting trend on a screen." He'd make a dismissive gesture with his hand, as if swatting away a fly. Then came the part that always stung. "Honestly," he said, leaning back in his chair, surveying the family with a confident smirk, "I worry about Serafina. She deserves stability. Someone with a real career, a future. Not a failure, really." The word hung in the air, failure. He said it so casually as if it were a simple fact. Serafina started to interject, "Father, please," but Victor waved her off, his eyes still fixed on me. The other family members shifted uncomfortably, some casting sympathetic glances my way, others just looking away, avoiding the tension. I felt a flush creep up my neck, but I held it in. I just offered a polite, unwavering smile, trying to keep my expression neutral. Inside, though, it felt like a small, sharp twist. I wasn't a failure. Not in my own eyes, anyway. My company, Nexus Solutions, was small, but it was growing. We were developing AI-driven inventory and supply chain optimization software for large-scale retail businesses. It was niche, complex, but incredibly powerful. It was the kind of innovation Victor, in his old-school world, simply couldn't grasp. My relationship with Victor had always been challenging, right from the moment I met Serafina. She was a breath of fresh air in my life, kind, brilliant, and genuinely supportive of my unconventional path. But her father, he was a different story. The first time I met him, at an engagement dinner, he had grilled me about my career. When I explained I was starting a tech company focused on software solutions, he scoffed. "Software? What, like computer games? My business is real, bricks and mortar, something you can touch." He made it clear he saw my work as a flimsy, unstable venture, nothing compared to his multi-state retail chain. Every family gathering after that was a test. He'd openly mock my computer games, contrasting them with his real business. Despite the constant jabs, the public dismissals, I held on to my quiet confidence. My business partner, Jasper, was a brilliant, eccentric tech wizard. He handled the intricate coding, the technical development. He was intensely loyal and believed in my vision implicitly. We were building something real, something truly impactful, even if Victor couldn't see it. We started small, working out of a bustling co-working space in Boston, then moving to a slightly unconventional but rapidly expanding office. We secured a few modest clients, meticulously refining our algorithms, proving our concepts. Our growth was organic, fueled by reinvested profits and a deep belief in our product, not by splashy venture capital. We were building a reputation for quiet reliability and cutting-edge results.
Back at the Thanksgiving table, as Victor launched into another anecdote about his latest big deal, I just kept my smile, a small subtle flame of resolve burning within me. He thought I was a failure. He thought my business was a joke. He had no idea what was quietly taking shape, far from his sight, in a world he simply didn't understand. And he had no idea how closely our paths were about to intertwine, in a way he would never expect. My computer games, as Victor loved to call them, were a constant source of friction even before Serafina and I were engaged. The first time I met her parents, it was at a formal dinner at their country club. Victor, in his element, holding court, made it clear from the outset that he had a very specific vision for his daughter's future husband. And I, with my tech startup dreams, certainly didn't fit it. He asked me about my career,
My aspirations. When I explained that I was building a company focused on software solutions for business efficiency, his eyes narrowed. Software? What, like for entertainment? He'd scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. My business is real, tangible assets, bricks and mortar, something you can touch, you know? He made it sound like my work was fleeting, insubstantial. From that day on, every family gathering became a performance. Victor would praise Gavin's latest promotion in his finance firm, or boast about Serafina's steady job in marketing. Then he'd turn to me, his smile barely hiding the condescension. So, Reese, still working on those algorithms? He'd ask, drawing out the word as if it were something mystical and impractical. I tried to explain. I talked about how our software could streamline complex supply chains, reduce waste, optimize inventory. I spoke of innovation, of the future of business. But he wasn't interested. He believed in what he could see, what he could count in physical inventory. Fad, he'd dismiss. Airy-fairy nonsense. My sterling home and lifestyle chain has been around for 50 years. That's real business. Serafina was always caught in the middle. She loved me fiercely, supported my vision completely. But I could see the toll her father's constant disapproval took on her. She'd try to mediate, to soften his words, to explain my work to him. Father, Reese is incredibly smart. His work is actually very cutting-edge and important. But Victor would just wave her off, his pride immense and unyielding. It's just a phase, sweetheart, he'd tell Serafina later in my hearing. He'll get a real job eventually, something stable, something with a real future. He genuinely believed he was looking out for her, but his words felt like a constant erosion of my worth, of my chosen path. My own parents were always supportive, but they lived far away, and they couldn't shield me from Victor's relentless judgments. I learned to develop a thick skin, to let his words pass over me like unpleasant weather. But still, the sting was there. The implied message that I wasn't good enough for his daughter, that my dreams were foolish. Despite all this, I never wavered in my commitment to Nexus Solutions. My business partner, Jasper, was my rock. Jasper was a coding genius, a true eccentric who saw the world in elegant lines of code and logical systems. We'd met at a hackathon years ago, and we clicked immediately. He believed in the power of our software with an almost religious fervor. We started small. Our first office was a cramped corner in a bustling co-working space in Boston. It smelled of cheap coffee and late-night pizza. We worked long hours, fueled by passion and instant ramen. We built our algorithms from the ground up, meticulously testing, refining, and perfecting every line of code. Our first clients were small, independent online retailers. They didn't have Victor Sterling's vast resources, but they had complex inventory problems, and we solved them. Our growth was organic, built on word of mouth and the undeniable efficiency our software brought to their operations. We weren't chasing venture capital at every turn. We were focused on building a solid product, letting the results speak for themselves. We reinvested every penny of profit back into development, into hiring a small, dedicated team of engineers and analysts. I remember one late night. Jasper and I were hunched over our screens, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code. You know, Reese, Jasper said, stretching, sometimes I wonder if your father-in-law would even understand what we're doing. He thinks inventory is just a pile of boxes. I chuckled, a wry smile on my face. He wouldn't. He sees a traditional business. He doesn't see the unseen complexities, the invisible problems we're solving. Well, Jasper grinned, his loss, more market share for us. We expanded, moving into a slightly larger, unconventional office building in a less glamorous part of Boston. It wasn't a skyscraper in Manhattan, but it was ours. It was a place where innovation hummed, where lines of code translated into real-world efficiency for our clients. We were building a reputation for quiet reliability and cutting-edge results. Our client list was growing, slowly but steadily, with companies who valued efficiency and data-driven solutions.
Victor Sterling, in his gleaming New York towers, knew none of this. He was too consumed by his own empire, too proud of his traditional methods. He saw me as the failure, the one playing with computer games. He had no idea that the very problems he was so confidently dismissing were the ones we were quietly, meticulously learning to solve. And he certainly had no idea how those solutions, and the man he deemed a failure, would eventually come to intersect with his own carefully built world. While I was building Nexus solutions, brick by quiet brick in Boston, Victor Sterling was maintaining his grand facade in New York City. From the outside, his sterling home and lifestyle retail empire still looked formidable. Glossy advertisements, prime storefronts, and a long-standing reputation for quality. But what I was starting to understand, through the whispers of the industry and the quiet hum of data, was that appearances could be deceiving. Victor was a man of immense pride. He'd built his business from the ground up, starting with a single hardware store and expanding it into a multi-state chain. He believed in doing things the old-fashioned way: personal relationships, intuition, and a heavy reliance on physical inventory. He prided himself on his gut instincts for what customers wanted, and he trusted his longtime managers to handle their stores. Technology for him was a tool for the younger generation, not something fundamental to his established empire. But the retail landscape was changing rapidly, even for a seasoned veteran like Victor. Online shopping was booming, consumer habits were shifting, and efficiency was becoming paramount. His old-fashioned supply chain methods, once a source of pride, were becoming a significant liability. Inventory management, which he dismissed as a minor detail, was bleeding his company dry. I started to see the signs, not directly from Victor, of course, but through industry reports and data analysis. I saw companies similar to his struggling with massive amounts of unsold stock in some locations, while others were losing sales due to empty shelves. This chaotic inventory management led to huge carrying costs, discounts to clear excess, and frustrated customers. These were precisely the problems Nexus Solutions was designed to solve. He publicly maintained an image of invincibility. At family dinners, he'd brag about his profits, about his solid standing. But behind the scenes, the cracks were beginning to show. I heard whispers through Serafina, who worked in a different division of his company, that some of the regional managers were complaining about stock discrepancies and logistical nightmares. She didn't understand the depth of the issue, but she knew things were becoming messy. One of Victor's longtime advisors was a man named Mr. Thorne. He was Victor's financial advisor, a discreet and highly intelligent man who had a reputation for keen insight. He was loyal to Victor, fiercely so, but he also had a quiet respect for genuine talent and for data, regardless of its source. I'd met him a few times at family events. He was always quiet, observing, rarely joining in Victor's pronouncements. I'd noticed him listening intently whenever I briefly tried to explain my software. Serafina confided in me once, after a particularly tense board meeting her father had attended. "Dad's really stressed," she'd said, her brow furrowed. "He's having trouble with inventory across the chain. Mr. Thorne keeps suggesting these new digital solutions, but Dad just dismisses them as too expensive, too complicated. He says his old ways are fine." Victor was too proud, too steeped in his own success to see the writing on the wall. He believed his decades of experience trumped any newfangled technology. He thought he could outmuscle the market through sheer willpower, through his established name. But the market didn't care about names or traditions. It cared about efficiency and adaptation. Jasper and I, in Boston, continued to focus on building the best possible software. We weren't thinking about Victor Sterling's company specifically, not yet. We were just focused on solving problems for anyone who needed them. But as our own solutions became more sophisticated, more robust, the parallels to Victor's struggles became clearer. He was unknowingly facing the very problems our software was designed to untangle. It was ironic, really. The very computer games he mocked were the answer to his growing woes. His once unassailable position was becoming increasingly vulnerable, not because of outside competition necessarily, but because of his internal inefficiencies, his stubborn refusal to adapt. He was a powerful ship, but he was slowly taking on water, and he didn't even realize how the man he called a failure held a very blueprint for the pump that could save him. The invitation to the major retail industry conference in Miami landed on my desk, and I felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just another networking event. It was a gathering of the biggest players. Jasper and I flew down, setting up our display, which was less flashy graphics and more direct demonstrations of our software's capabilities. We focused on showing real-time data, efficiency gains, and cost reductions. We knew our product spoke for itself. As the conference got underway, the halls buzzed with activity. I spent hours talking to potential clients, explaining the intricacies of AI-driven inventory management. It was exhilarating to see the light bulb go off in people's eyes as they grasped the power of what we had built. One afternoon, I noticed a familiar figure hovering near our booth. It was Mr. Thorne, Victor Sterling's financial advisor. He was standing a little apart from the crowd, his gaze fixed on our demonstration screens. He wasn't engaged in conversation, just observing with that quiet intensity I remembered from family gatherings. He seemed genuinely intrigued. Later that day, I was grabbing a coffee when Mr. Thorne approached me. He looked a little less formal than he did in New York, his tie slightly loosened. "Reese," he said, his voice low and discreet. "Mr. Sterling's son-in-law, correct?" "That's right, Mr. Thorne," I replied, shaking his hand. He nodded, then lowered his voice further. "I've been watching your demonstrations. Very impressive. What you're doing, it's precisely what many large retailers are struggling with." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "Including, I must admit, Sterling Home and Lifestyle." My ears perked up. This was it, the direct confirmation. "Victor is resistant to change," Mr. Thorne continued, a hint of frustration in his voice. "He believes his established methods are sufficient. But the truth is, the retail landscape has shifted. His inventory systems are chaotic. He's bleeding money on logistics. It's a significant financial strain, though he'd never admit it publicly." He didn't explicitly ask for help for Victor. He simply laid out the facts, the vulnerabilities of the Sterling Empire. But the implicit message was clear. Victor's company was in deep trouble, and it desperately needed a solution like Nexus. Mr. Thorne, loyal to Victor, but clearly also a man who understood the value of data and efficiency, was subtly trying to push Victor towards the future, even if Victor wouldn't listen to him directly. As he spoke, a much bigger picture began to form in my mind. It wasn't just about offering our software as a service to Victor. It was about something far more significant. His empire, the very thing he prided himself on, the thing he had used to belittle me for years, was vulnerable. Nexus Solutions had the exact antidote to his woes. I thanked Mr. Thorne for his insights, keeping my expression neutral, my thoughts racing. "I appreciate you sharing that, Mr. Thorne," I said. "It's always valuable to understand the industry's challenges from different perspectives." I walked away from that conversation with a clarity I hadn't had before. Victor Sterling's pride was his greatest weakness.
His refusal to adapt, his dismissal of new technologies, was leaving his entire empire exposed. And Nexus Solutions, the computer game company, was uniquely positioned to step in. I found Jasper later, my mind buzzing with the possibilities. "Jasper," I said, "we need to talk strategy. Big strategy." He raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in my tone. "Bigger than optimizing warehouses?" "Much bigger," I replied, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "I think it's time we stopped just solving problems for others and started solving one for ourselves, a very specific one." The idea was audacious, almost unbelievable. It would require immense capital, precise execution, and absolute secrecy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was not only possible, but the most logical, impactful move we could make. The ultimate solution, the perfect answer to years of being called a failure. The conversation with Mr. Thorne in Miami had been a pivot point. It wasn't just a revelation about Victor's business woes. It was a clear signal. His empire was vulnerable, and we, the computer game people, held the key. I spent the flight back to Boston running simulations in my head, analyzing every angle. When I pitched the idea to Jasper, he just stared at me, his usual calm replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. "You want to buy out Sterling Home and Lifestyle?" he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Reese, that's a whole different league. Victor Sterling's chain? That's a legacy." "Precisely," I responded, pushing a detailed financial projection across the desk. "And legacies can crumble if they don't adapt. Nexus Solutions has the antidote. Our software is the exact solution to their bleeding inventory and supply chain chaos. Instead of just selling them the cure, we become the patient's new owner." The plan was audacious, yes, but it was also incredibly logical. Victor's pride wouldn't allow him to purchase our software, to admit his methods were outdated. But if we owned his company, our software would become the very foundation of its revitalization. It was the ultimate leverage, the ultimate statement. We began to meticulously plan the acquisition. This wasn't a hostile takeover in the traditional sense, not with flashy headlines or aggressive public bids. My goal wasn't to destroy Victor, but to strategically acquire his business, to modernize it, and to prove the worth of what I had built in a way he could not ignore. The first step was to quietly raise capital. Nexus Solutions had been profitable, but a full acquisition of a chain like Sterling Home and Lifestyle required significant funds. We leveraged Nexus Solutions' own substantial, though privately managed, assets and our rapidly growing revenue. We secured discrete loans from banks and private equity firms who saw the immense potential in our software and the opportunity to turn around a struggling retail giant. We emphasized the power of our AI-driven solutions and our track record of efficiency gains. The crucial part was keeping it entirely under wraps. Secrecy was paramount. Any leak would alert Victor and give him time to mount a defense or sabotage the deal. I relied heavily on Mr. Thorne, who, after our Miami conversation, had quietly begun to trust my vision. He didn't actively assist the takeover, but he provided subtle, invaluable insights into Sterling Home and Lifestyle's internal struggles and financial structure, all within the bounds of his ethical obligations. He had seen Victor's stubbornness for years and, I believe, saw this as the only way his beloved Sterling empire could truly survive and thrive. He subtly shifted his loyalty, not against Victor personally, but towards what he perceived as the inevitable and better future for the company. I didn't even tell Serafina. This was the hardest part. She was caught between her father and me, and the emotional toll on her would be immense if she knew what I was planning. I knew she'd worry, perhaps even try to dissuade me, or accidentally reveal something to her father. This had to be a complete surprise for everyone. I carried the weight of that secret, the silent burden of such a huge undertaking. The acquisition itself was a complex, multi-layered process. We didn't just buy the whole company at once.
We discreetly started purchasing significant blocks of shares through various shell corporations and investment vehicles, slowly building up a controlling interest without triggering any alarms. It was like assembling a giant puzzle, piece by careful piece, all while Victor remained blissfully unaware, preoccupied with his traditional business and his public image of invincibility. Jasper, with his brilliant mind, handled the intricate financial modeling and legal groundwork. He had a meticulous eye for detail, ensuring every step was legally sound and strategically executed. We worked tirelessly, late into the nights, fueled by the sheer audacity of the plan and the quiet satisfaction of seeing it come together. As the final stages of the acquisition neared, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. The failure my father-in-law had mocked for years was about to acquire his entire business chain. It wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about proving a point, about showing that true innovation, quiet determination, and a willingness to adapt could build an empire far more resilient than one built solely on tradition and pride. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The weeks leading up to the final acquisition felt like living in a pressure cooker. Jasper and I were working around the clock, finalizing legal documents, securing the last pieces of funding, and ensuring every detail was perfect. The quiet of our Boston office belied the massive, intricate operation unfolding. I felt a constant knot in my stomach, a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. The secret was heavy, especially the one I was keeping from Serafina. She knew I was busy, but she couldn't possibly guess the true scope of what I was doing. Then one Tuesday morning, the call came. Not from Mr. Thorne, not from Jasper, but directly from Victor Sterling's executive assistant. Her voice, usually so composed, sounded strained. "Mr. Reese," she said, "Mr. Sterling is calling an emergency board meeting. Immediately. He insists on your presence." "My presence?" I asked, feigning surprise. Why would I be needed at a Sterling home and lifestyle board meeting? He says he needs to address a hostile acquisition attempt. And he believes you might have some insight, given your tech background. He sounded quite agitated, Mr. Reese. Very agitated. A slow, knowing smile touched my lips. The plan had worked. The discreet share purchases, the quiet leveraging of funds. It had finally triggered enough of a takeover signal to alarm Victor. He likely saw a faceless corporate raider, someone he didn't know, threatening his empire. He was looking for answers, and perhaps a scapegoat, or some technical explanation he thought I could provide. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll be there as soon as possible." I hung up and looked at Jasper. He was already smiling, a glint in his eye. "Showtime?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Showtime," I confirmed. "Book the first flight to New York, and make sure Mr. Thorne is ready to join us." The flight felt different this time. It wasn't just another business trip. It was the culmination of years of quiet effort, of being underestimated, of building something substantial in the shadows. I spent the journey mentally rehearsing what I would say, how I would present the facts. It wasn't about gloating, but about making a clear, undeniable statement. As the car drove through the familiar, bustling streets of Manhattan, towards Victor's gleaming skyscraper headquarters, I felt a strange sense of calm. The building, which had once felt like a symbol of his intimidating power, now seemed like just another structure. We arrived at the executive floor. The tension in the air was palpable. Assistants scurried about, faces etched with worry. I saw some of Victor's longtime executives, their expressions grim. They clearly knew something big was happening, but they didn't know the full story. I walked into the opulent boardroom. Victor was already there, pacing furiously, his face beet red, a vein throbbing in his temple. The other board members were seated, looking tense and anxious. They were all older, established businessmen, used to Victor's dominance. When he saw me, Victor stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, usually so sharp, were narrowed with disbelief and fury.
"What are you doing here, Reese?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the large room. He pointed a finger at me. "This is a serious business meeting, not one of your little tech conventions. You're irrelevant here." Jasper stood quietly beside me, a briefcase in his hand. Mr. Thorne, who had arrived just moments before us, took his seat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. I met Victor's furious gaze. The years of quiet dismissals, the Thanksgiving jabs, the condescending remarks, they all flashed through my mind. But I felt no anger, only a quiet resolve.
Actually, Victor, I said, my voice quiet but firm, resonating clearly in the suddenly silent room. I took a step forward, placing the stack of meticulously prepared documents, bound neatly, on the polished mahogany table directly in front of him. Each document represented a piece of the puzzle, a step in the acquisition. "I'm here," I continued, "because I just completed the acquisition." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching as comprehension slowly dawned on his face. Nexus Solutions now owns a controlling interest in Sterling Home and Lifestyle. Victor Sterling, the mighty magnate, the man who had called me a failure, stared at me, utterly speechless. His face, already red with anger, drained of all color. His empire, the very thing he had prided himself on, now belonged to the man he had scorned. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a world shifting on its axis. Here is Chapter 7, the concluding chapter of Reese's story, where the ultimate revelation unfolds. Chapter 7, The New Order. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Victor Sterling's face was a mask of disbelief. Then slowly a deep, furious red began to creep back into his cheeks. He looked like he'd been punched. He stammered, trying to find words, but nothing came out. The sheer audacity, the unexpectedness of it all, had rendered him speechless. What is this nonsense?" he finally managed, his voice a strained whisper, though the fury was still simmering beneath the surface. He gestured wildly at the documents I had placed on the table. You little failure! This is impossible!" I remained calm. "It's not nonsense, Victor. It's the culmination of months of meticulous planning and strategic acquisitions. Nexus Solutions now holds a controlling interest in Sterling Home and Lifestyle." My voice was clear, firm and devoid of triumph, just factual. Jasper, ever the professional, stepped forward. "The paperwork is all in order, Mr. Sterling. Every share legally acquired. Every loan secured. The transition is complete." He opened his briefcase and laid out additional binders, thick with legal agreements and financial statements, proving every word. Then Mr. Thorne, Victor's longtime financial advisor, spoke up from his seat at the table. His voice was quiet, but it commanded attention. "Victor," he said, looking directly at my father-in-law, "I've been trying to tell you for years. Your traditional methods, your refusal to adapt to the changing retail landscape, it's been bleeding the company dry. Your inventory management alone was a disaster. Nexus Solutions software is exactly what this company needs to survive, to thrive in the modern market." He looked at me then, a subtle nod of respect in his eyes. "Reese saw the problems, Victor, and he found the solution." Victor slowly turned his head to Mr. Thorne, a look of betrayal on his face. "Thorne, you're with him?" Mr. Thorne simply met his gaze. "I'm with the future of Sterling Home and Lifestyle, Victor, and that future is technology, efficiency, and a new vision." The realization settled over Victor like a crushing weight. He wasn't just losing his company. He was being outmaneuvered by the very person he had consistently belittled. The empire he had built, the symbol of his pride, was now in the hands of the man he called a failure. Just then, the boardroom door opened, and Serafina walked in. She must have heard the commotion, or perhaps she sensed the shift in the air. She stopped, her eyes wide, taking in the scene, her father, pale and speechless, the scattered documents, Jasper and Mr. Thorne standing with me. "Reese, "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. I looked at her, my heart aching slightly that I had kept this from her, but knowing I had to. "Serafina," I said, "I've acquired Sterling Home and Lifestyle. Nexus Solutions now owns the company." Her jaw dropped. She looked from me to her father, then back to me, trying to process the magnitude of my words. There was shock, yes, but then, slowly, a look of profound awe and pride began to spread across her face. She saw the years of hard work, the quiet determination, the unwavering belief in my vision, all culminating in this moment. Victor, defeated, finally slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. The fight had gone out of him. The battle was over. The new order had arrived. The aftermath was complex. Victor eventually stepped down, maintaining a symbolic advisory role, but the power had shifted. Nexus Solutions immediately began integrating our AI-driven software throughout the Sterling Home and Lifestyle chain. The transformation was remarkable. Inventory issues vanished, supply chains became streamlined, and profits began to soar. The company, once teetering on the brink, was revitalized. My relationship with Victor, predictably, changed. It wasn't a sudden embrace, but the constant, belittling remarks stopped. He couldn't call me a failure anymore. He had seen firsthand the power of what I had built. Sometimes he'd even ask me about the new technology, a grudging respect entering his voice. The experience taught me a profound lesson. True value and success often exist beyond traditional perceptions. Victor saw only what he could touch and count. I saw the unseen inefficiencies, the digital solutions that could transform an entire industry. It showed me that underestimation can be a powerful, hidden advantage. His pride and dismissal allowed me to operate in the shadows, to build my strength and plan my move without resistance. And most importantly, I learned that humility and foresight are more powerful than pride and stubbornness. Victor's refusal to adapt cost him his empire. My willingness to embrace innovation, even when it was mocked, allowed me to build something truly revolutionary. I didn't do it for revenge, not truly. I did it to build something meaningful, to prove the value of my vision, and to